The modernist ideals were still alien to many who were responsible for the well-being of thousands in the slums, but one London borough was different.
In the 1930s, Finsbury was one of the poorest and unhealthiest boroughs in the country. Socialist councillors in what was often described as the People's Republic of Finsbury drew up the Finsbury Plan for public libraries, swimming pools, a market, day nurseries and a health centre. In the end, the only thing that was built was the health centre, but it was revolutionary. Tecton, led by Berthold Lübecke, were perfect architects for the job. They'd already produced plans for an ideal health centre as early as 1932, plans that had been seen by a Finsbury doctor. According to Lübecke, nothing was too good for ordinary people.
The centre was desperately needed to tackle diseases like TB, probably the biggest killer. The smog deprived the population of sunlight and caused rickets in children, and homes were ridden with fleas and lice. Finsbury Health Centre opened in 1938, 10 years before the NHS was created. There was nothing like it anywhere in the country.
It must have seemed so alien in this area.
Well, I imagined for people who lived here, and you have to imagine that it was a sort of sooty, blackened, rat-infested, overcrowded inner London borough with high levels of deprivation. When this thing arrived, you know, clean, cream, gleaming, it was like a sort of flying saucer, you know, delivering healthcare to the local population.
Everything was very carefully planned. The offices were upstairs, the treatment rooms were all easily accessible on the ground floor. There was a TB clinic, a dentist surgery, a clinic for women, even a solarium and a chiropodist.
It was the idea of an open terrace to promote health and vitality, yet the smog and the soot must have been dreadful around here.
Well, it was. I mean, I think the idea was that it was going to get better, and therefore one should encourage the idea of outdoor activity. So it was an important part of the overall proposition.
You knew Lübecke well in his later years. What sort of a man was he?
He was a very complex man. I mean, he had this very rich background. He'd come out of Russia in the early 1920s and had been a witness to some of the ferment after the revolution. And he had a very clear idea of art's social purpose from that experience. And he was a highly cultured man, very serious, but also very funny.
Well, I must say, I didn't expect to be here at 50 years after. Ooh.
You mean you wouldn't expect you to be here or the building to be here?
Both.
It's astonishingly, stuff survives here. I mean, these chairs are his.
Yeah, there's some original furniture here. Some tables are still here. The original light fittings on the wall there are highly characteristic, and you see them in High Point 2, for example. But many other things have changed. They intended to have no reception desk at all. It was to feel like a club where anyone could stroll in, you could sit down, read a paper, you didn't need to have an appointment, and then eventually a nurse might come along and say, hello, can I help you in any way? And you'd sort of be absorbed into the ethos of better health. I would say Finsbury Health Centre is the most complete expression of the ideals of modern architecture of its time. It had the three key messages: a very progressive social programme, the use of new technology, advanced building techniques as they were then, and a very powerful, I think, aesthetic statement.
When Finsbury Health Centre opened in October 1938, hundreds of GPs and dignitaries were invited to see for themselves how radical modernist thinking had reinvented healthcare in Finsbury. Among these guests were representatives of many other local authorities, The movement they had resisted throughout the 1930s had proved it could solve some of their biggest problems. The establishment could no longer deny that modernism was the way forward. But in Europe, the powers that had forced so many émigré architects to flee to Britain had their own far less benevolent vision of the future. Less than a year after the centre opened, Britain declared war on Germany. The modernist plans for a brave new world would have to wait. If you would like a free information pack and more details about Open University programmes, then call us on 0870 900